That afternoon, a strong gust of wind swept across the schoolyard at Lakeview High, rustling the trees that lined the walkway leading to the parking lot. Liam Reynolds, the school's principal, had just finished a long meeting and stepped out of the building with his usual tension worn openly across his face. One hand held his phone, the other clutched a thick folder tight under his arm, as though loosening his grip might make everything fall apart. He was the picture of professional excellence, sharp jawline, intense eyes, posture that never wavered. But what made people turn and look wasn't just his presence, it was how immaculate he always appeared. A navy Armani suit, a crisp white Tom Ford shirt, a silver Graziella silk tie, and polished Berluti leather shoes that gleamed with every step. On his wrist was a vintage Jaeger-LeCoultre timepiece, glinting in the soft afternoon light. Liam didn't dress carelessly. For him, every detail was a display of control, and he was a man who lived by control. Except, in this moment, he had none. As he pushed open the glass doors, a sudden blast of wind tore the folder from his arm. Papers burst into the air like startled birds. Budget projections, student performance graphs, letters from irate parents, whipping into a tiny storm right there in the middle of the schoolyard. He muttered under his breath, crouching to chase them down, half holding his coat in place and half scrambling after loose pages slipping under students' feet. Then a small voice spoke beside him, clear, calm, and surprisingly composed. "I'll help." Liam turned and froze. A little girl, no older than 5, knelt beside him. Her light brown curls were tied into 2 small pigtails. Her cheeks flushed, and her large, bright blue eyes met his. Eyes so familiar, they looked just like his. She wore a plain white t-shirt, a light denim jumper, cuffed white socks, and glittery pink sneakers. Her knees were dusty from the pavement, but she didn't seem to care. Her tiny hands moved with careful precision, picking up each page and stacking them neatly. No panic, no hesitation, just quiet, focused help. Liam stared at her, momentarily stunned. He was used to rebellious teens, frustrated parents, overworked teachers, but never had a stranger's child made his heart feel like this, clenched, uncertain, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice lower than usual. The girl smiled and handed him the pile of papers. As he bent to take them, the sunlight caught something near her wrist, and his eyes locked onto it. A delicate silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant dangled gently below her collar. Etched into its surface was a distinctive emblem, a stylized flower design. Liam recognized it instantly. It was the necklace he had once held in his hand, placed in a velvet box and given to Sophie, the woman he had walked away from 5 years ago, right after she told him she was pregnant. His heart thudded violently. The wind still blew, the students still chattered, the day marched on, but time within him slowed to a crawl. He looked up again at the girl, those blue eyes, that soft smile, the tilt of her chin. He didn't need a DNA test. He didn't need a name. He didn't even need words. Just a look, a necklace, and the ache blooming in his chest. Then the little girl said with effortless sweetness, "My name's Ellie." Liam stood there, frozen. He couldn't breathe. Liam remained still as if something invisible had locked him in place. Ellie? That name echoed in his mind like a foreign sound wrapped in painful familiarity. The little girl tilted her head as she looked at him, completely unbothered, as though she was used to grown-ups going quiet after just one sentence from her. He wanted to ask something, anything, but his throat had gone dry. His hand still held the stack of papers, though he'd forgotten why they had ever mattered. His gaze drifted once more to the necklace around her neck. His heart pounded. There was no doubt anymore. He crouched slightly, trying to steady his voice. "Ellie, that necklace? Did your mom give it to you?" The girl nodded, then lifted her wrist with casual ease, like she was showing off a favorite gift. "My mommy said it used to belong to my daddy. He gave it to her." Liam felt a chill ripple down his spine. That innocent little sentence cut through him like a slow blade, slicing into the memories he had buried for the last 5 years. "Your daddy." Each word carried an impossible weight. He couldn't breathe properly. His hands clenched slightly, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He stared at Ellie, as if trying to find something to hold onto in the middle of the storm rising inside him. And then Ellie smiled again. A bright, carefree smile, completely unaware that she had just shattered a man's world, with nothing more than a passing remark. "My mommy's across the street," she added cheerfully, pointing to a small cafe with a cream-colored sign. "She's getting me a cookie." Liam's chest tightened. In that moment, all the sounds of the city faded. Cars, chatter, the distant honk of traffic, leaving only the wind and the pounding in his ears. He followed the direction of her finger to the figure of a woman standing at the counter, back turned. He didn't need to see her face. He already knew it was Sophie. Liam stood frozen, the stack of papers in his hands long forgotten, his eyes fixed on the glass door of the small cafe across the street. Through the hazy window, he saw the silhouette of a woman. Slender frame, soft brown hair falling just past her shoulders. She was rummaging through her purse, completely unaware that a storm of memories stood just a few steps away. Sophie. Even after 5 years, Liam recognized her instantly. It wasn't just her figure or her hairstyle. It was the feeling that followed her, a kind of quiet gravity that made everything else go still. Once, that had made him fall in love. Now it made it hard to breathe. He crossed the street, heart pounding like a drum. Each step carried pieces of his past with it. The last fight, the final unanswered call, the look on Sophie's face when he left without a word. When the door opened, the chime above rang softly. She didn't turn around. Not until Ellie ran inside ahead of him, her voice bright. "Mommy, I helped a man pick up his papers, and he knew my name, and the necklace too." Sophie froze, her back straightened, her shoulders tensing ever so slightly. Then, slowly, she turned. Their eyes met, and for one suspended second, the world went silent. No sounds, no movement, only two people staring across a gap of years, one full of regret, the other full of disbelief. Liam barely whispered, "Sophie." She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned his face and then dropped to Ellie, who was holding his sleeve like it was the most natural thing in the world. The truth hit her like a wave. "Liam?" she said quietly, unsure if it was even real. He nodded. 1,000 words sat on his tongue, apologies, explanations, guilt, but nothing came out. Sophie looked from Ellie to him, then back again. Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. Is she why you're here?" Liam stepped back slightly, then motioned to a nearby table by the window. He didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want Ellie to feel the tension. They sat, a small table between them, but it felt like an ocean. "Her name is Ellie, isn't it?" he asked, though he already knew. Sophie nodded slowly. One hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, like anchoring herself in the present. Liam looked at her, his voice tight. "Sophie? Is she my daughter?" There was no answer at first. Sophie stared at him, long and hard. Then her eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with the exhaustion of someone who had nothing left to hide. She nodded. "Yes. Her name is Ellie, and she's your daughter." Liam felt the world tilt. Nothing in all the meetings, plans, or leadership decisions of the last 5 years could have prepared him for this moment. He had thought he'd left the past behind, but the past had grown into a 5-year-old girl with his eyes. The air inside the cafe felt thick, almost heavy. Ellie was happily nibbling on her cookie, blissfully unaware of the tension building between the two adults sitting across the table. Between Liam and Sophie, silence hung like a stretched wire. One wrong word could snap it in two. It was Sophie who finally broke it. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like metal drawn across stone. "You disappeared." Liam lowered his head. No excuses, no defenses. "I told you I was pregnant," she continued, her hand gripping a coffee cup she hadn't even touched. "And you just stood there, didn't say a word. Then you left." Liam looked up, his eyes reddening. I was scared. Sophie laughed, a sound completely void of joy. You were scared? And what about me? I faced being a mother alone, faced your silence, your empty side of the bed every night. You were scared. What do you think I was? Liam closed his eyes. He deserved every word. He knew it. I wasn't afraid of her, he said softly. I was afraid of me. What does that even mean? I was afraid I'd become my father. Cold, harsh, always hurting people and calling it love. I grew up thinking that if I loved someone too much, I'd end up breaking them. I thought, if I left, you and the baby would be safer. Sophie didn't speak for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. No, Liam, you weren't protecting anyone. You were protecting your own fear. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth. Liam swallowed hard. That sentence cut deeper than any anger could have. Ellie looked up just then, holding out a crumb of cookie to her mother. The tiny gesture, so innocent, momentarily softened the fire simmering between the two adults. Sophie smiled at her daughter, then turned to Liam, really looking him in the eyes for the first time. You weren't there when she was born, when she had her first fever, when she took her first steps, when she asked me, "Where's my daddy?" I had to make up a different story every time. I know. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to make it right. I'm here. I'm not running anymore. This time, Sophie didn't respond, but she didn't look away. And for Liam, that was the first glimmer of hope. After that meeting, Sophie didn't make any promises. She didn't say, "We'll talk again," and she didn't stop him from leaving. She simply scribbled her number onto a napkin and handed it to him. Not with hope, but like handing him one final test. If you're serious, she said, start by being a father. Liam took the napkin, gripping it tightly like it might vanish if he wasn't careful. He didn't call the next day. He knew one phone call couldn't undo 5 years of silence, but in the afternoon he went to the park near Sophie's apartment, the one she'd once mentioned Ellie loved on weekends. He stayed at a distance, watching. When Ellie came down the slide and spotted him, her face lit up. No hesitation, no resentment. "Hi, Mr. Liam," she shouted, running toward him like they'd always known each other. Sophie sat on a bench nearby. She froze at first, but didn't leave. Liam knelt to Ellie's eye level. "What do you want to play today?" he asked. From that day on, he came to the park every weekend. He brought her favorite juice and snacks, the ones she'd casually mentioned. He listened when she talked about school, laughed when she imitated cartoon voices, and patiently helped her build tiny block castles for hours. He didn't talk about the past, didn't offer long apologies. He just showed up. One afternoon, Ellie sat in his lap and asked, "Who's my dad?" Liam looked at Sophie. She was sitting nearby, silent. Then she gave him a small nod. "It's me," he said. Ellie blinked. "So, you're my dad?" "Yes," he said. "I'm your dad. And I'm really sorry I wasn't here sooner." She didn't answer right away, but then she rested her head on his shoulder, her tiny hand finding his. And for Liam, it felt like a miracle. A few weeks later, Sophie invited him over for dinner. Not because she fully trusted him, but because Ellie had started asking more often. "Is Dad coming? Will he see my drawing? Does he like my stories?" That night's dinner was simple: spaghetti, water, and a slightly awkward atmosphere. But when Ellie giggled about a paper dog she made in art class, Liam laughed with her. Sophie watched them from across the table. She said nothing, but something shifted in her expression. Not quite forgiveness, but a door just slightly opening. In the days that followed, nothing unfolded like a fairy tale. There were no dramatic shifts, no magical transformations, just a series of small, ordinary meetings, simple but consistent. Saturday mornings at the park, where Ellie would tumble through grass, climb the jungle gym, and leap into Liam's arms with muddy sneakers. Tuesday afternoons at the library, where he sat cross-legged on the rug beside her, reading brightly colored picture books again and again. Ice cream trips on the weekend, where Ellie debated endlessly between vanilla and chocolate, and Liam always pretended to be disappointed when she picked the flavor he didn't like. Sophie never stayed far. She was always present, but on the sidelines, watching quietly. And slowly, she began to notice. Liam wasn't performing. He didn't take photos for social media. Didn't ask cliché questions like, "Do you love daddy?" Didn't make big promises. Instead, he listened as Ellie described a weird dream. He bent down to tie her shoelaces gently, like he was afraid he'd snap a fragile thread of trust. He spent an hour on the concrete steps of the park, drawing a rainbow-colored dragon with chalk. Once, Ellie tripped and scraped her knee. Before Sophie could react, Liam was already beside her, pulling out a tissue, gently wiping the blood and asking, "Does it hurt, little warrior?" Ellie bit her lip, trying not to cry, and nodded. Liam didn't rush to hug her. He didn't overcomfort. He simply sat beside her, holding her hand in silence until she leaned into him on her own. Sophie watched from a distance, her chest tightening, not from pain, but from the realization that something in him had truly changed. Not the kind of change people claim to earn back trust, but the quiet kind, the kind built action by action, moment by moment. One day, after Ellie mentioned she liked space books, Liam returned the next visit with a handmade cardboard model of the moon, complete with tiny LED lights. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't perfect, but Ellie hugged it like it was a treasure. Sophie caught his gaze as Ellie beamed at the gift. It wasn't the look of a man chasing forgiveness. It was the look of a man slowly relearning how to be a father. One small, imperfect step at a time. One evening, as Ellie fumbled through a pile of books, trying to pick one for bedtime, she turned and asked Liam, "Daddy, where were you before?" The question held no blame. It came out gently, like a simple curiosity from a child trying to complete the puzzle of her world. Liam froze. He was sitting on the carpet, surrounded by picture books and stuffed animals. Sophie's small apartment no longer felt foreign. It had become a place of new memories. But that question, it cut deep, silently. He glanced at Sophie. She was at the sink, washing dishes, her back turned. But for a moment, her shoulders seemed to pause. Liam took a deep breath. "I was somewhere where I didn't have enough courage," he said. "I thought disappearing would make things better for you and your mom, but I was wrong." Ellie didn't reply right away. She just nodded slightly, then crawled into his lap and held out a book. "Can we read this one?" He wrapped his arms around her, not because it was what he was supposed to do, but because he wanted to. He wanted to hold her tightly, like he was holding on to the part of his life he had nearly lost. Liam read to her, slowly, his voice calm and warm. Sophie stood in the kitchen, listening to every word, and for the first time in years, she realized something in him had truly shifted. He was no longer the man who walked away in tears, no longer the one who vanished behind silence. He was a father now, learning how to stay. After Ellie fell asleep, Liam stepped out onto the balcony, where Sophie stood quietly with a cup of tea. They didn't speak for a few minutes. Then Liam said softly, "She asked me tonight where I had been." Sophie turned toward him. Her gaze was no longer cold. "And what did you say?" "I told her I was scared, but I'm not running anymore." She didn't answer right away, but for the first time since he returned, she didn't look away. In that quiet moment, Liam no longer saw himself as a man seeking forgiveness. He was a man waking up to responsibility, to love, and to the version of himself he had long denied. Sophie said nothing, but she watched. She watched the way Liam tilted his head to listen to every little story Ellie told, about the class cat, the paper star hanging in the library, the dream where she flew across the sky. She watched him kneel to retie her shoelaces, with the kind of patience that made it feel like the most important task of the day. As she saw his eyes, not heavy with guilt or calculation, but simply the eyes of a man who was trying to do right, day by day. No promises. No, "Please give me a chance." Just presence. Quiet, steady, and without performance. Sophie once believed her heart had shut completely, walled off by hurt, disappointment, and the fear of trusting again. But now, as she stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Liam read aloud to their daughter with that low, warm voice, something inside her shifted. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in far too long. Hope Elise didn't ask anything else that night, but Sophie could feel it. Questions were growing quietly inside her daughter, like seeds just beginning to sprout beneath the soil, waiting for the moment to push through. She no longer asked about Liam's favorite color or if he ever played with dolls. Now the questions carried a quiet depth. Mommy, what was it like before Daddy came? Does Daddy know my birthday? Who held me first when I was born? Sometimes Sophie would just run her fingers through Ellie's hair. Other times she answered gently, small stories, soft truths, just enough to comfort without reopening old wounds. Then came the day that meant the world to Ellie, the spring garden celebration at Lakeside Elementary, and for once, she got to walk into school with her father by her side. Liam arrived early, a small bouquet of yellow daffodils in hand. He wore a pale blue shirt, no tie, and clean brown shoes. He looked nervous, but calmer than before, softer. When Ellie appeared in her white dress, her handmade flower crown slipping slightly to one side, she ran to him without hesitation. He bent down, caught her in his arms, and held on. Sophie followed behind at a slower pace. She stood beside them during the event, not touching, not leaning in, but no longer building walls between them either. "You Are My Sunshine" rang out over the loudspeakers, as children sang out of sync, some louder than others. But to Liam, Ellie was radiant, glowing in the sunlight, her voice unsure but bright. He blinked back tears. When the song ended, he turned his face slightly to wipe his eyes. Sophie noticed, but said nothing. After the show, families moved to the refreshment tables. Ellie tugged Liam's hand toward the juice and cookies. Sophie stayed close by, near a group of parents chatting. She didn't mean to overhear, but the words sliced through the spring air anyway. "That's him, isn't it? The dad who left before she was even born? 5 years, and now he's back like nothing happened. Some people just don't know shame." The words were quiet, but sharp, too sharp. Sophie froze. But what broke her was not the gossip. It was Ellie's stillness. She didn't speak, didn't turn. Her small fingers trembled slightly around her juice cup. The joy of the morning cracked like thin glass. On the drive home, silence filled the car. Ellie didn't sing along to her favorite playlist. She didn't talk about her flower crown or her classmates. She stared out the window, lips pressed tight. Sophie held her hand, but it felt more fragile than ever. At home, Ellie didn't ask for a snack. She went straight to her room. The door was slightly ajar, not closed, but not open either. Sophie stood at the threshold for a moment, then knocked. "Can I come in?" No answer. But when she entered, Ellie sat quietly on the edge of her bed, still wearing the flower crown, now crooked and wilting. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Sophie asked gently. Ellie didn't answer right away. Her small hands twisted in her lap. Then she looked up, eyes shimmering. "Mom, did Daddy really leave me?" Sophie's heart stopped. She didn't cry, but something deep inside her splintered. She walked over, sat beside her daughter, and pulled her close. "Who told you that?" she whispered. Ellie didn't name names, just murmured, "I heard it. They said Daddy left before I was born, that he didn't want me." Sophie closed her eyes, because no matter who was to blame, Ellie was the one carrying the hurt. "They don't know the whole story, baby," she said softly. "They don't know who your dad is now. What matters is how you feel when you're with him." Ellie looked down. "I feel warm, but I also feel sad. I don't understand why he left." Sophie stroked her hair, her voice steady. "It's true, he left a long time ago, but not because of you. Never because of you." Ellie met her gaze, tears brimming. "And why did he come back?" Sophie paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because that question hit the sorest place. The place where she had once stopped believing, and only now was learning to believe again. She smiled softly. placing a hand over her daughter's heart, because he realized he had lost the most precious thing in his life. Me? Yes, you. One Friday evening, as the sun hovered gently over the rooftops, Sophie spoke. Are you free tonight? I made dinner. Ellie's been asking all day. Liam almost didn't believe what he heard. He didn't ask what to bring. He just nodded. When he arrived, Ellie flung open the door, her little feet thudding against the floor, eyes sparkling. Daddy's here. Sophie had made a simple spaghetti with tomato sauce and meatballs. Nothing fancy, but it was the first family meal that included Liam. The tiny kitchen filled with warmth from laughter, the clinking of cutlery, and Ellie's endless stories. After dinner, while Sophie cleared the dishes, Liam sat cross-legged on the living room floor, fixing a doll whose arm had snapped off during a fall. I had a doll like that when I was little, Sophie said, her voice drifting like a memory. Liam looked up and smiled. Well, now Ellie has her own personal repair crew. Later, he read a story to Ellie. His voice was calm, low, and playful, mimicking characters with different voices, pausing in all the right places. Ellie giggled, clutching her pillow, her eyes bright with delight. Before leaving, Liam pulled out a small bouquet of white daisies from his coat pocket. I remembered you once said you liked simple flowers. Sophie took them wordlessly, but even when she turned away, her hand didn't let go of the bouquet. At night, no one mentioned the past. No one said, I've changed, or do you forgive me? Everything that needed to be said was simply present. Liam didn't do anything dramatic, but in the little things, the way he sat on the floor to fix a toy, read aloud with care, brought flowers without occasion, stayed quiet but never distant, Sophie began to feel something shift. He wasn't the man she once loved. He wasn't the man who had walked away. He was someone new, someone who knew how to stay, how to be patient, and how to show that presence can be the greatest gift of all. One weekend afternoon, the small park near their home swayed gently in the breeze. Leaves rustled in the trees. Ellie sped ahead on her pink scooter, rolling confidently over the stone path. Sophie and Liam walked slowly behind her, shoulders close but still a familiar space between them. The silence wasn't awkward, it was thoughtful. Do you ever wonder, Sophie asked softly, what would have happened if you hadn't left? Liam turned to look at her, sunlight catching the edges of his hair, turning it a soft golden brown. Every single day, he answered without hesitation. Every morning, every night, I imagine it all. Ellie taking her first steps, her first birthday, you tired and alone with no one there to help. I think about everything I missed and everything you had to carry by yourself. Sophie was quiet for a moment, her eyes on Ellie as the little girl tried to lift her scooter over a low step. You know, she said after a beat, I used to imagine the opposite. If you had stayed, would we still be a family? Or would we have just hurt each other more? Liam slowed his steps, gaze fixed ahead. I've asked myself that too, he admitted. Maybe I wasn't ready back then, but I want to be ready now. Not to make up for the past, because some things can't be undone, but to do it right, for you, for Ellie. Sophie glanced over at him. Her expression wasn't cold anymore, but it still held a thin layer of caution. Like glass over an old scar. I haven't forgiven you. Not completely. I know, Liam nodded. I'm not expecting that. You might need more time, or maybe it'll never come. I'll still be here. The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant laughter. Ellie turned, waving from up ahead. Mommy, Daddy, I did it. Sophie smiled, so gently only Liam caught it. She started walking faster toward their daughter, but before she reached her, she said, I don't know where this is going, but maybe we can try. And for the first time, Liam didn't feel like he was being given a chance. He felt like he was being invited. A small, fragile hope, but real. He followed them, his heart warm in the quiet. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen window, a soft rhythm like a lullaby. Warm yellow light spilled from the ceiling lamp, casting a golden hush over the quiet apartment. Ellie was fast asleep, curled up with her favorite stuffed bear, Sophie and Liam sat at the wooden table, the same table that had witnessed their first awkward dinner, quiet stares, and cautious beginnings. Sophie stirred her tea slowly, eyes fixed on the tiny swirl. Liam watched her, silently, but with a heart full of gratitude. He didn't need words to know the distance between them was shrinking, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, consistent presence. Then he leaned slightly forward, voice soft as a breath. "If you want, maybe we could try again, not just for her, but for us. No ring, no fireworks, no one down on one knee surrounded by candles, just a whisper, simple as breath, heavy as a vow." Sophie paused, then looked up. Her eyes didn't glisten with tears, nor was she overwhelmed with surprise. She simply looked deeply enough for Liam to know she'd heard him, felt him, and maybe started to let go. "I don't know how far I can go," she said softly, "but if you don't run this time, I won't turn away." A small sentence, but for Liam, it opened the sky. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say another word. He just sat there, listening to the rain. And for the first time in years, his heart felt at peace. The wedding took place on a gentle spring morning. The sky was clear, the sun warm, as if nature itself had agreed to let them begin again. Sophie's mother's backyard had been transformed with fairy lights, wildflowers, and printed photos of Ellie from babyhood to now. Soft reminders that everything had started with love. Only close family and a few old friends were there, and Ellie, dressed in a tiny white dress, her hair braided neatly, carrying the ring pillow with the seriousness of a queen. Liam waited at the end of the garden path, not in a formal suit but in a crisp white shirt, light-colored trousers, and a single flower pinned near his heart. He didn't need anything more. The way he looked at Sophie said everything. She stepped through the back door, in a soft ivory dress, her hair down, no veil, no heels. She didn't need anything else either, because in that moment she wasn't walking toward a fantasy. She was walking toward the man who no longer promised magic, but who promised to stay. There were no long speeches during the ceremony, just quiet vows exchanged with joined hands and unwavering eyes. Then came the moment of the gift. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was an old necklace, one Sophie had once worn when they were young, but now, alongside the original charm, it had a new one, an elegant E and a sparkling blue stone. "I had it restored," Liam said gently, "for you, for Ellie, for us." Sophie took it, tears welling before she could stop them. Not because of its value, but because it wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was a promise, a symbol of the journey the three of them had walked, from fractured to whole. After the ceremony, Ellie squealed, bouncing up and down. "Mommy married Daddy. I was the best ring girl ever." Laughter rippled through the garden like sunlight. It wasn't a perfect wedding, but it was real enough to believe that from this day forward, they would no longer walk alone.